The morning my daughter walked through my door with a man I'd never seen before and announced I'd be serving him breakfast at 5 in the morning, I knew my peaceful life was about to shatter. But what I didn't know was that within 24 hours, I'd uncover a scheme so calculated, so methodical, that it would send me down a path I never imagined. This is my story, and I'm telling it because someone out there might need to hear it. My name is Catherine Morrison, and I'm 52 years old. For the past 6 years, I've lived alone in a small coastal cottage that I bought after my divorce, a place that's become my sanctuary. It's nothing fancy, just 3 bedrooms overlooking the sound, but it's mine. Every morning, I wake up to the sight of water stretching toward the horizon, and every evening, I watch the sun paint the sky in colors I never get tired of seeing. That Tuesday morning started like any other. I was sitting on my back porch with my coffee, watching a pair of seagulls fight over something on the beach when I heard tires on gravel. I wasn't expecting anyone. My daughter Emily and I had barely spoken in the past month, not since I'd told her I thought rushing into marriage with someone she'd known less than a year was a mistake she might regret. Through the window, I watched her climb out of an unfamiliar car, followed by a man in an expensive suit. Emily was 29, and she had her father's impulsive streak. The man behind her moved with the confidence of someone used to getting his way. They were hauling luggage, not just overnight bags, but the kind of suitcases people pack when they're planning to stay a while. "Mom!" Emily called out, pushing through my front door without knocking. "We're here." I set down my coffee and went inside. "Here for what, exactly?" "Listen, Grant," she said, gesturing to the man beside her like she was presenting a prize. "My husband. Grant, this is my mother, Catherine." Husband. The word hit me like cold water. The last time we'd talked, she'd mentioned a boyfriend named Grant who worked in finance. Now he was her husband, and they were standing in my living room with enough luggage for a month. Grant extended his hand with a smile that looked practiced. "Mrs. Morrison, Emily's told me so much about this place. It's even more beautiful than she described." "Thank you," I said, shaking his hand and noticing the watch on his wrist, the kind that costs more than most people's monthly rent. "Congratulations on your marriage. I didn't realize there was a wedding." "We kept it small," Emily said quickly. "Just us and a justice of the peace. We wanted it to be intimate." What she meant was they'd wanted to avoid questions. Avoid me suggesting they slow down. Avoid her father pointing out that Grant was a husband number 2 for her, and she wasn't even 30 yet. "Well, it's certainly a surprise," I said. "How long are you planning to visit?" "Just a few days," Grant said. "Maybe a week," Emily corrected, shooting him a look. "We're on our honeymoon, and hotels felt so impersonal. I told Grant there's nowhere more peaceful than here." I glanced around my living room, my book on the side table, my knitting basket by the couch, my laptop still open from the morning. This was my space, arranged exactly how I wanted it, and now 2 strangers were about to move into it without asking. "Of course," I said, because what else could I say? "Let me show you to the guest room." As I led them upstairs, I caught Grant looking around with an appraising eye, not the way you admire someone's home, but the way you evaluate property. It made something cold settle in my chest. The next morning, everything became clear. I was making breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast, nothing fancy, when Emily came downstairs and sat at my kitchen table like she lived there. She didn't offer to help. She just pulled out her phone and started scrolling. "Mom, we need to discuss something," she said without looking up. Grant appeared a moment later, already dressed for the day in another expensive suit, and sat down beside her. He smiled at me like we were about to have a pleasant conversation. "What's on your mind?" I asked, dividing eggs onto his 3 plates. "Well," Emily said, finally putting down her phone, "Grant and I have been talking about your situation here." "My situation?" "Living alone in this big house. It's isolated out here, Mom. What if something happened? What if you fell or had a medical emergency?" I set the plates on the table and sat down. "I'm 52, Emily, not 80. "We know," Grant said smoothly, "but this property is a lot for one person to maintain. The upkeep alone must be overwhelming." "It's not overwhelming at all." "What Emily's trying to say," Grant continued, "is that we think it might be time to consider downsizing." moving somewhere more manageable, closer to town where you'd have neighbors and support. I looked between them, my daughter who couldn't meet my eyes and her husband of probably 2 weeks, who was looking at me with practiced concern. You want me to sell my house? We want you to consider your options, Grant said. I work in real estate investment and I'd be happy to help you navigate the process. This property could sell for well above market value right now. You could live very comfortably on the proceeds. The pieces were clicking into place. The sudden marriage, the unannounced honeymoon at my house, the concerned suggestions about my welfare. That's very thoughtful, I said carefully, but I'm happy here. Emily finally spoke up. Mom, you're not getting younger. Wouldn't it be better to make these decisions now while you can still enjoy the benefits? Not getting younger. I was 52, healthy, independent, and she was talking about me like I was one fall away from a nursing home. I'll think about it, I said, just to end the conversation. But later that morning, while they were out walking on the beach, I opened my laptop and started searching. I typed in Grant's full name, Grant Holloway, and watched the results populate. 3 LLCs registered to his name, 2 of them dissolved. A real estate investment company with exactly 1 active project, a small commercial building that was currently in foreclosure. And buried on the second page of results, an article from a local newspaper about a lawsuit filed by an elderly widow who claimed she'd been pressured into selling her home below market value to an investment company that promised monthly payments she never received. The company was called Holloway Holdings. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. My daughter had married a con artist, and now they were both sitting in my living room, planning how to take my house. That's when I knew exactly what I had to do. The next morning, Emily delivered this speech that made me realize just how deep this went. I was standing at my stove making breakfast again. Apparently, this was my new role in their honeymoon fantasy, when Emily walked in and sat down at the counter like she was about to deliver a presentation. Mom, we need to talk about expectations, she said, not looking up from her phone. I turned from the eggs I was scrambling. No, what kind of expectations? Grant appeared behind her, settling onto a bar stool with his tablet already open. He'd been doing this since yesterday, treating my kitchen like his personal office, humming to himself while he read financial news, making calls about opportunities and market positions. Since we're staying here for a bit, Emily said, I think we should establish some ground rules, so everyone's comfortable. Ground rules in my own house. I'm listening, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Grant has a very specific morning routine. He's an early riser, up by 5 usually. He needs to start his day properly with good nutrition and a quiet environment for his calls to clients on the East Coast. I glanced at Grant, who was nodding along like this was perfectly reasonable. That sounds like something Grant should handle himself, I said pleasantly. Well, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. Emily's voice took on that wheedling tone she'd used as a teenager when she wanted something. Since you're always up early anyway and you love cooking, I thought maybe you could help out with breakfast for him. Nothing complicated, just having something ready by 5 would be perfect. I sat down my spatula and turned to face them fully. You want me to wake up at 4 in the morning to make breakfast for your husband? It doesn't have to be anything fancy, Emily said quickly. Just coffee, strong, no sugar, and maybe something substantial. Grant really likes eggs Benedict, or a fruit plate, whatever you think is appropriate. Eggs Benedict. At 5 in the morning. Grant finally looked up from his tablet, offering me one of his practiced smiles. Mrs. Morrison, what Emily's trying to say is that we'd really appreciate any help you could provide. You're the host, after all, and we're grateful to be here. Host. As if I'd invited them. As if I'd asked them to disrupt my peaceful mornings and make demands about meal service. I see, I said slowly. You're so good at this kind of thing, Mom, Emily added. Taking care of people. It's really one of your strengths, and it would help Grant be more productive during our stay. One of my strengths, like being domestic help, was a talent I should be proud to offer rather than a set of skills I'd developed to take care of my own life, on my own schedule, in my own home. I plated their breakfast, regular eggs and toast, and watched Grant cut into his food with the precision of someone who'd never had to cook for himself. He'd probably spent his entire adult life with women eager to prove their worth by anticipating his needs. "This is delicious," he said. "You're really talented, Mrs. Morrison." "Thank you." "It'll be good practice for when you move into a smaller place," Emily added brightly. "You'll have so much more time for the things you enjoy when you don't have all this space to maintain." They were so confident, so sure that I'd go along with their plan. Serve breakfast at dawn, sell my house, hand my life over to Grant's professional management. After they finished eating and announced they were driving into town to explore, I stood at my kitchen sink and watched their rental car disappear down the driveway. Then I opened my laptop again. This time, I wasn't just searching for information about Grant's businesses, I was looking for his victims. It took me less than an hour to find the first one. Margaret Patterson, 73 years old, living in a suburb 2 hours from here. According to the lawsuit records, she'd sold her family home to Holloway Holdings 18 months ago. Grant had promised to invest the proceeds and pay her monthly income. The payment stopped after 4 months. Now her house was in foreclosure, and she was facing eviction. I found Grant's phone number in the lawsuit documents and called her. "Mrs. Patterson, my name is Catherine Morrison. I'm calling about Grant Holloway." There was a long pause. "Are you another one of his lawyers?" "No, ma'am. I think he might be targeting me next. I wanted to ask you about what happened." For the next 30 minutes, Margaret Patterson told me everything. How Grant had met her at her husband's funeral, offering condolences and subtle suggestions about her situation. How he'd seemed so helpful, so concerned about her welfare. How he'd convinced her that managing the big house alone was too much, that she needed professional help with the financial complexities, and he made it sound like he was doing me a favor, she said, her voice breaking. Like I was lucky someone with his expertise cared enough to help. I trusted him with everything, my house, my savings, my future, and now I have nothing. "Mrs. Patterson, I'm going to give you some phone numbers. There are people who can help you, legal aid organizations, elder fraud divisions. Don't give up." After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table with my notebook and started documenting everything. Grant's business history, his pattern of targeting women, the timeline of his relationship with Emily, how it had started just 3 months after I'd mentioned my house to her during a phone call, how quickly he'd moved from boyfriend to fiancé to husband. My daughter hadn't fallen in love. She'd been recruited. When they returned that afternoon, loaded with shopping bags from expensive boutiques, Emily was practically glowing. "Mom, you'll never guess what we found in town. The most amazing real estate office. The agent said properties like this are incredibly sought after right now. She mentioned several similar houses that sold way above asking price." "How interesting," I said. Grant nodded enthusiastically. "The market is exceptionally strong for waterfront properties. If you were seriously considering selling, now would be the perfect time." I looked at them both, my daughter with her new designer clothes and her husband with his predatory confidence, and smiled. "You know, I've been thinking about what you said, about my situation here." They exchanged a quick glance, and I saw the flash of triumph in Grant's eyes. "That's wonderful, Mom," Emily said. "I knew you'd see reason." "Yes, the reasoning is very clear. And I've also been thinking about your breakfast request, Grant. 5 a.m. is quite early." "I know it's an imposition," he said, though his tone suggested he didn't find it imposing at all. "But a good start to the day really makes all the difference." "Of course it does," I agreed. "I completely understand. I'll make sure everything is ready for you tomorrow morning. Something special." Emily actually kissed my cheek. "You're the best, Mom." That evening, I made them dinner on my good china, the dishes I'd inherited from my grandmother, the ones I'd never used for my daughter before. I served them wine from the bottle I'd been saving for a special occasion, and I listened to them discuss their plans for maximizing the property's potential. As if I weren't sitting 3 feet away, they talked about renovations, about vacation rental income, about removing walls and updating fixtures. They were carving up my home like it was already theirs. After they went upstairs, I cleaned the kitchen slowly, methodically. Then I sat on my back porch with a glass of wine, listening to the sound of waves in the darkness. Grant wanted everything his way. Grant valued his morning routine. Grant expected breakfast at 5 a.m. Perfect. I was going to give him exactly what he asked for. At 10 p.m., I went to my bathroom cabinet and pulled out the bottle of fiber supplement tablets I kept for occasional digestive issues. Natural, gentle, completely harmless in normal doses. I crushed 6 of them into a fine powder and stored it in a small container. Tomorrow morning, Grant was going to learn an important lesson about underestimating women. Tomorrow morning, I was going to make him the most memorable breakfast of his life. My alarm went off at 4 in the morning, just like I'd promised. I moved through my dark kitchen with the muscle memory of someone who'd been cooking in this space for 6 years. The house was silent except for the distant sound of waves and the quiet hum of my refrigerator. Grant and Emily were still asleep upstairs, completely unaware of what was waiting for them. Coffee first. Grant liked it strong, no sugar. I ground fresh beans, the expensive dark roast I usually saved for special occasions, and measured them carefully into the filter. While the machine gurgled to life, I retrieved my small container of crushed fiber supplement from where I'd hidden it in the spice cabinet. I added a generous amount to the coffee grounds. Then, for good measure, I added a bit more. The eggs Benedict took longer. I'd been cooking for 34 years, raised 3 kids before Emily, though she was the only one still speaking to me regularly, so making a picture-perfect breakfast wasn't challenging. What was challenging was deciding exactly how much of my special ingredient to incorporate. I cracked eggs into simmering water, watching them swirl and set. The hollandaise sauce came together perfectly. Butter, egg yolks, lemon juice, and 3 more crushed tablets mixed in so smoothly that the slight bitterness would be completely masked by the richness of the sauce. For Emily, I prepared plain scrambled eggs and toast. She hadn't demanded breakfast service, so she'd get exactly what she always got from me, the bare minimum effort required to avoid being called neglectful. At 4:45, I heard footsteps upstairs. Grant's internal clock was apparently as precise as his demands. I arranged his plate beautifully. The poached eggs perfectly centered on toasted English muffins, hollandaise sauce drizzled artfully across the top, fresh fruit on the side. It looked like something from a restaurant. I poured his specially prepared coffee into my finest china cup. "Mrs. Morrison?" Grant appeared in the kitchen doorway wearing a silk robe that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. He looked genuinely surprised. You actually got up this early. You said 5 o'clock. I aim to please." He sat down at my counter, and I placed the breakfast in front of him like I was presenting a work of art. In a way, I was. "This looks incredible," he said, inhaling the aroma of the coffee. "You really didn't have to go to all this trouble." "No trouble at all." I watched him take his first sip of coffee and smiled. "I believe in giving people exactly what they ask for." Grant ate with the enthusiasm of someone who'd grown accustomed to having his needs anticipated and met without question. He complimented the eggs, praised the beer. Coffee told me how much he appreciated having someone who understood the importance of a proper morning routine. "You're quite the hostess," he said, finishing the last bite. "Emily was right about your talents." "I have many talents," I replied. "Some of them take longer to reveal themselves than others." Emily wandered down 20 minutes later, still in her pajamas, looking like she'd expected to find me already cleaning up after her husband's breakfast. "Oh, good. You actually did it," she said, as if there'd been some question. "Of course I did it. I always keep my word." "See?" Emily helped herself to coffee. "This is exactly what I was talking about. You're so good at taking care of people. It's really what makes you happy." Taking care of people, as opposed to having my own life, my own interests, my own schedule. According to my daughter, my highest calling was serving breakfast to her husband before dawn. "I live to serve" traits, I said, and neither of them caught the sarcasm. Grant excused himself to shower and prepare for his morning calls. I cleaned up the kitchen while Emily sat at the counter scrolling through her phone, occasionally commenting on how nice it was to have a proper breakfast ready without having to think about it. "Grant is really impressed with you," she said eventually. "He said you remind him of his late mother. She always had everything organized and taken care of." His late mother. I was 52 years old and my daughter's husband was comparing me to his deceased parent. How flattering. "I think this arrangement could really work for everyone," Emily continued. "You get to feel useful and needed. We get to enjoy quality family time. And Grant gets the environment he needs to be productive. Quality family time, where I provided free meal service at dawn while they plotted to steal my house. I was wiping down counters that were already spotless when I heard it. Grant's voice drifting down from upstairs, calling Emily's name with a note of urgency. "Emily, where's the bathroom?" "Upstairs hall, first door on the right," she called back, not looking up from her phone. A pause, then, "I found it, but is there another one?" I kept wiping, hiding my smile. "Mom, do you have any stomach medication?" Grant's voice came from the top of the stairs, sounding considerably less confident than it had during breakfast. "In the medicine cabinet," I called back. "Are you feeling unwell?" "Just a bit of stomach upset. Probably something I ate yesterday." Emily finally looked concerned. "Grant, are you okay?" "I'm sure it's fine. Could you maybe postpone my 9 o'clock call? I might need a few more minutes." Over the next hour, I tracked Grant's movements by sound. The bathroom door opening and closing. His footsteps, walking at first, then moving faster. By the third trip, he was practically running. "I don't understand what's wrong with him," Emily said, pacing around my kitchen. "He never gets sick. He has this whole health routine, supplements, exercise, everything. Food poisoning can be very sudden," I said sympathetically. "Maybe something from that restaurant you went to yesterday? But I ate the same things he did, and I feel fine. Everyone reacts differently to bacteria." Grant appeared in the doorway, pale and sweating, one hand pressed against his stomach. "Emily, I need you to call my doctor. Something is seriously wrong." "Should I take you to the hospital?" Emily was starting to panic, which was almost as satisfying as watching Grant's discomfort. "Let's see how you feel after it works its way through your system," I suggested helpfully. "Sometimes these things just need time." "Mrs. Morrison," Grant said weakly, "do you have any Pepto-Bismol? Imodium? Anything?" "Let me check." I made a show of looking through my medicine cabinet and returned with a bottle of regular antacids that would do absolutely nothing for his current problem. "This might help," I said, handing them over. Grant swallowed 4 tablets and retreated upstairs again. For the rest of the morning, the soundtrack of my house was Grant's footsteps, rushing between the bedroom and bathroom, punctuated by Emily's increasingly worried questions and his strained responses. By noon, he was too weak to come downstairs. "Mom, I think we need to take him to urgent care," Emily said. "He's been sick for hours." "If you think that's best," I agreed. Though sometimes these stomach bugs just have to run their course. "This isn't a stomach bug. This is serious." I looked at my daughter with all the concern I could muster. "You're probably right. Food poisoning can be dangerous if it gets severe." As they prepared to leave, Emily helping a hunched-over Grant down the stairs, he managed to look at me with confusion and misery. "Mrs. Morrison, I'm so sorry about this," he said weakly. "I don't know what happened." "These things are unpredictable," I said. "I do hope you feel better soon." I watched them drive away, Grant hunched in the passenger seat like he was afraid to move too suddenly. Then I went back to my kitchen and disposed of the remaining crushed fiber supplements I'd hidden in the spice cabinet. Tomorrow morning, Grant would probably be feeling much better, but I doubted he'd be quite so enthusiastic about requesting breakfast at 5 a.m., and this was just the beginning of what I had planned for my unexpected house guests. Grant spent 4 hours at urgent care, only to be told he had a severe case of food poisoning and needed to rest and stay hydrated. When they returned that afternoon, he looked like a man who'd aged a decade in a single morning. "The doctor said it was probably something he ate yesterday," Emily announced as she helped Grant up the stairs to the guest room. "He needs to stick to bland foods for the next few days." "How terrible," I said, following them with a pitcher of ice water. "I feel awful. What if it was something I served this morning?" "No, Mom. The guy said the timing doesn't match. Food poisoning from breakfast would have hit him much sooner." Grant collapsed onto the guest bed, like his legs couldn't support him anymore. "Mrs. Morrison, I'm so sorry about all this. I know we've disrupted your routine." "Don't you worry about anything," I said, arranging pillows behind his back. "Your only job is to get better." For the rest of the day, Grant stayed in bed, while Emily played nursemaid, bringing him sips of ginger ale and checking his temperature every hour. I made simple chicken broth for dinner and served it to him on a tray, playing the concerned hostess to perfection. "You're so kind," Grant said weakly. "I don't know what we would have done if we were staying at a hotel." "That's what family is for," I replied, noting how quickly he'd embraced the family designation when he needed care. That evening, while Grant slept fitfully upstairs, Emily and I sat on my back porch, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of orange and pink. "I'm really worried about him," she said. "He never gets sick. He's so careful about his health." "Sometimes our bodies surprise us," I said. "Stress can lower immunity." Stress? What would he be stressed about? "Well, a new marriage, traveling, making big life decisions." She looked at me sideways. "What big life decisions?" "Your suggestion about me selling this house, that's a major financial undertaking. I'm sure Grant feels responsible for helping me make the right choice." "Oh," she seemed to consider this. "Actually, we were planning to talk to you more about that. Grant has some concrete proposal he wanted to present once he's feeling better." "I'm sure he does. He really knows what he's talking about, Mom. He's helped other people in similar situations. Similar situations, like elderly Margaret Patterson, who was now facing eviction because Grant had stopped sending her the payments he'd promised." "I'd be very interested to hear his proposals," I said, "when he's recovered, of course." The next morning, Grant emerged from the guest room looking significantly improved, though still cautious. He'd apparently spent the night afraid to eat anything substantial, which meant my fiber supplement surprise had accomplished exactly what I'd intended. "How are you feeling?" I asked as he tentatively sipped the herbal tea I'd prepared. "Much better, thank you. I think the worst is over." "I'm so glad. There's nothing worse than being sick away from home." Grant nodded, then looked around my kitchen with that appraising expression I'd come to recognize. "Mrs. Morrison, I hope we can continue the conversation we started a few days ago about your living situation." "Of course. I've been thinking about what you said." His eyes lit up with interest. "Really?" "Really. In fact, your illness yesterday made me realize how isolated I am out here. If something serious happened to me, no one would know for hours." Emily appeared in the doorway, still in her robe. "See, Mom, that's exactly what we've been trying to tell you." "Yes, you've been very persuasive." I poured Grant more tea. "You mentioned you had experience helping other people with their property decisions." "Absolutely. It's actually a specialty of mine, helping seniors transition from large properties they can no longer maintain to more appropriate living situations." Seniors. I was 52, and he was talking about me like I was ready for assisted living. "And you handle all the financial details?" "Everything. The property assessment, market analysis, sale negotiations, investment strategy for the proceeds. My clients don't have to worry about any of the complicated aspects." "Your clients," I repeated. "How many people have you helped with this kind of transition?" Grant exchanged a quick glance with Emily. "Several. In fact, I just completed a successful transition for a lovely woman in the suburbs who was struggling to maintain her family home. The lovely woman whose house was now in foreclosure proceedings." "That sounds perfect," I said. "I'd love to hear more details about how the process works." For the next hour, Grant laid out his vision for my future. I would sell the house to his investment company for what he called a fair market price, determined by his assessment, of course. The proceeds would be invested in a portfolio he would manage, providing me with monthly income while the principal grew. I would move to a small condo closer to town, where I wouldn't have to worry about maintenance or isolation. It was a beautiful plan for Grant. "This all sounds very professional," I said when he finished. "I'm impressed by how thoroughly you've thought this through." "I believe in being prepared," Grant said. "The real estate market can be volatile, so timing is crucial." "And you think now is the right time?" "Absolutely. The market is strong, interest rates are favorable, and frankly, Mrs. Morrison, you're at the perfect age to make this transition before you're forced to by circumstances." "Forced by circumstances, like a health crisis or financial emergency that would leave me vulnerable to exactly the kind of pressure he was applying right now." "I appreciate your concern for my welfare," I said. "It's touching to see how much you care about my future security." Grant beamed, apparently convinced he'd successfully manipulated a lonely middle-aged woman into handing over her most valuable asset. But Grant had no idea that while he was recovering from his mystery illness yesterday, I'd been making phone calls to Margaret Patterson, whose house he'd stolen, to a forensic accountant I'd found through my divorce attorney, to a very interesting private investigator who specialized in financial fraud. Grant thought he was closing in on his next victim. What he didn't realize was that I'd been setting a trap, and he was about to walk right into it. Grant, I said, standing up from the kitchen table, I think I'm ready to move forward with your proposal. The look of triumph that flashed across his face was almost worth the entire week of watching him treat my house like his personal resort. That's wonderful news, Mrs. Morrison, he said, already reaching for his phone. I can have my team start the assessment process as early as tomorrow. Actually, I said, raising my hand to stop him, I'd like to invite some other people to be part of this decision. You know how complicated financial matters can be for someone my age? His smile faltered slightly. Other people? Well, my attorney for one, and my financial advisor. I'm sure you understand. A decision this significant requires proper legal review. Emily looked confused. And Mom, I didn't know you had a financial advisor. Oh yes, Harold Chen. He's been managing my investments since the divorce. Very conservative approach, but he's kept me quite comfortable. I smiled at Grant. I'm sure you two will have a lot to discuss about investment strategies. Grant was nodding, but I could see the wheels turning behind his eyes. The presence of actual financial professionals would complicate his carefully crafted sales pitch. Of course, he said carefully. I always recommend independent verification. It's just good business practice. I knew you'd understand. I paused, watching his face. Oh, and I've also invited Margaret Patterson to join us. The color drained from Grant's face so quickly I thought he might faint. Margaret Patterson? Yes, the lovely woman you helped with her property transition. I thought it would be helpful to hear about her experience firsthand. We had the most interesting conversation yesterday while you were recovering. Emily was looking back and forth between us, clearly confused. Grant? Who's Margaret Patterson? Just doing my due diligence, I said cheerfully. When someone offers to help manage my financial future, I like to understand their background thoroughly. Grant had gone completely silent, staring at me like I'd just revealed I knew exactly where all the bodies were buried, and in a way I had. Grant stood up so abruptly, his chair scraped against my kitchen floor. I think there's been a serious misunderstanding here. I don't think so at all, I said calmly. In fact, I think the communication has been perfectly clear. I looked directly at him. You want to help me sell my house to your investment company, manage the proceeds through your financial services, and move me into a situation where I'm completely dependent on your expertise. That's not how I would characterize it. How would you characterize it? I'm trying to help you make a smart financial transition. The same way you helped Margaret Patterson? Grant actually stepped backward. How do you know about Margaret? Oh, we've become quite friendly. She's very interested in meeting you again, something about wanting to discuss why her monthly payments stopped coming and why her house is now in foreclosure proceedings. Emily was staring at her husband with growing horror. Grant, what the hell is going on? Emily, your mother has been listening to lies from people who don't understand legitimate business practices. Legitimate business practices? I interrupted. Is that what you call convincing elderly homeowners to sell their properties below market value to your investment company, then failing to provide the promised monthly payments? Those are complicated financial instruments, sometimes market conditions. Sometimes con artists get caught, I said, and sometimes their new wives discover they've married a fraud. Grant's mask of charm was completely gone now, replaced by a cold calculation. You have no idea what you're talking about, and you have no proof of anything inappropriate. Actually, I have quite a bit of proof. I walked to my kitchen counter and picked up the manila folder I'd placed there that morning. Harold Chen, my financial advisor, is also a forensic accountant. He's been very interested in reviewing the financial records for Holloway Holdings. Grant went completely still. You don't have access to those records. No, but the state does, especially when multiple complaints have been filed about fraudulent business practices. I opened the folder. Would you like to see the complaint I filed yesterday with the Attorney General's office? You did what? Filed a detailed complaint about a pattern of elder fraud targeting homeowners along the coast. I included Margaret Patterson's documentation, testimony about your business practices, and a fascinating analysis of how your investment schemes actually work. Emily sank into her chair. Mom, are you saying Grant is some kind of criminal? I'm saying Grant is a con artist who specializes in targeting women he thinks are vulnerable and isolated. I pulled out several documents. Women like Margaret Patterson, who thought she was making a smart financial decision. Women like me, who he assumed would be grateful for male guidance and financial protection. Grant was edging toward the door, but I wasn't finished. The beautiful part of your plan, Grant, was how you used my own daughter to get close to me. Marry the woman with access to the target, convince her she's helping her mother, exploit the family relationship to bypass normal suspicion. Emily, we need to leave now. But Emily was staring at him with dawning realization. The quick wedding. You wanted to get married before meeting my mother. You said it was romantic, but you were establishing legal cover. Emily, don't listen to her. She's a paranoid old woman who's been. I'm 52, Grant. Not old, not paranoid, and definitely not helpless. I stood up, holding the folder. I'm also not someone who can be intimidated by a failed real estate developer with a pattern of defrauding women. Grant made a break for the door, but I wasn't trying to stop him. I wanted him to run. The state, police will be very interested in your travel patterns, I called after him, especially since you're now officially under investigation for elder fraud. He turned back for one moment, his handsome face twisted with rage. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Actually, Grant, I know exactly who I'm dealing with. The question is whether you know who you tried to con. Grant was gone within 15 minutes, speeding away in their rental car like the house was on fire. What he left behind was my daughter sitting at my kitchen table, staring at the documents I'd spread in front of her. Mom, she said quietly, did I really bring a criminal into your house? You brought someone who saw you as a tool to get access to me and my property. The criminal part was just his method. I thought he loved me. He might have, but he loved the idea of my real estate more. Emily was quiet for a long time, processing the reality of her situation. She was legally married to a man who was about to be charged with multiple counts of fraud. What do I do now? She asked. You make a choice. You can contact Grant, warn him about the investigation, and try to help him avoid prosecution. Or you can cooperate with the authorities and try to minimize the damage to your own life. You make it sound simple. It is simple, not easy, but simple. I reached across the table and took her hand. Grant is a criminal, Emily. The only question is whether you're going to be his accomplice or his victim. As that afternoon, Detective Sarah Martinez from the State Police Financial Crimes Division arrived at my house with a briefcase full of documentation. Mrs. Morrison, the complaint you filed has opened up a much larger investigation than we initially expected, she said, settling into my living room. How much larger? Grant Holloway appears to have been operating this scheme across multiple counties over the past 3 years. We've identified at least 8 victims, mostly women over 60 who owned valuable real estate. 8 women. I thought about Margaret Patterson's frightened voice on the phone. The pattern is always the same, Detective Martinez continued. He identifies vulnerable targets, gains their trust, convinces them to sign over property management to his company, then systematically drains their assets. Emily spoke up from the corner. Detective, what's going to happen to me? I married him, but I didn't know about any of this. That depends on several factors. How much you knew, when you knew it, and then whether you're willing to cooperate with our investigation. I'll cooperate, Emily said immediately. I'll tell you everything I know. For the next 2 hours, Detective Martinez interviewed both of us. Emily provided information about Grant's business contacts and methods. I shared everything I discovered about his previous victims and his attempts to manipulate me. Mrs. Morrison, Detective Martinez said as she prepared to leave, you may have prevented him from adding several more victims to his list. Most people don't think to investigate someone their family member brings home. Most people don't have daughters who show up demanding breakfast service at 5 a.m., I replied. After the detective left, Emily and I sat on my porch watching the sunset. Mom, I owe you an enormous apology for bringing him here, for the way we treated you, for everything. You owe me more than an apology, Emily. You owe me an explanation of how you could watch your husband treat me like hired help and think that was acceptable. I know I was so caught up in feeling important and being married to someone successful that I lost sight of what was right. You've always had a tendency to get caught up in appearances, but this time, your poor judgment brought a predator into my home. How do I make this right? I looked at my daughter. You start by taking responsibility for your choices and their impact on other people, and then you figure out who you want to be when you're not trying to impress someone who was using you. That evening, Grant finally called Emily's phone. She looked at me before answering, and I nodded. Put it on speaker. Emily, thank God. Grant's voice was tight with panic. Are you okay? Where are you? I'm still at my mother's house. Where are you? I'm in another state. Listen, your mother has been telling lies about me to the police. She's trying to cause problems for us. What kind of problems, Grant? She filed some kind of false complaint claiming I defrauded people. It's completely fabricated, but I need to stay away until my lawyer can sort it out. Grant, Emily said carefully, I talked to Margaret Patterson today. Silence. She told me about her house, about the missing payments, about the foreclosure. Emily, that's a complicated business situation. There were market conditions. Grant, I said, leaning toward the phone. This is Catherine. I think you should know that your wife has decided to cooperate with the police investigation. Emily, don't listen to her. She's a vindictive old woman who's trying to destroy our marriage. Our marriage destroyed itself when you used it to commit fraud, Emily replied, and I felt a surge of pride at the strength in her voice. Emily, please, I love you. We can work through this. No, Grant, we can't. I'm filing for divorce. She hung up and turned off her phone. That felt good, she said, surprising both of us. Good, it should. Grant's second mistake was underestimating how thoroughly I'd document everything. His first mistake was trying to con me in the first place, but he wouldn't fully understand that until much later. 3 days later, Detective Martinez called with news that Grant had been arrested trying to cross state lines. They'd found a laptop in his car containing detailed files on over 20 potential targets, including a complete dossier on me. Mrs. Morrison, we need to discuss what we found in Grant's files, she said when she arrived at my house with an FBI agent named Foster. More evidence of fraud? Evidence of something much bigger than fraud. Agent Foster opened his laptop. Grant wasn't working alone. He was part of an organized network that specifically targets affluent women through what they call relationship acquisition. My blood ran cold. What does that mean? They identify women with valuable assets, research their personal lives and vulnerabilities, then assign operatives to establish romantic or family relationships to gain access. Emily, who'd been staying with me since Grant fled, looked sick. You're saying Grant was assigned to target my mother? We're saying Grant didn't meet you by accident, Ms. Morrison. You were selected because of your relationship to your mother and her property holdings. Agent Foster turned the screen toward us. There was a file labeled Catherine Morrison Target Assessment. Below it were subfiles: financial assets, psychological vulnerabilities, social connections, and something called escalation protocols. According to these files, Agent Foster continued, your property was identified as a target over a year ago. Grant spent months researching your family relationships before approaching your daughter. Emily was staring at the screen with growing horror. Everything about our relationship was planned? The coffee shop where we met, the things we talked about, all of it? All of it was carefully orchestrated based on psychological profiles they'd developed. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. How many other women are currently being targeted by this network? Based on what we've found so far, at least 15 active operations across multiple states. 15 women who had no idea they were being systematically manipulated by professional criminals. What happens next? I asked. Grant has agreed to cooperate with our investigation in exchange for a reduced sentence. He's providing information about the network's operations and other targets. Agent Foster paused. Mrs. Morrison, your case is crucial to our prosecution strategy. You're the only target who recognized the scam and documented it thoroughly enough to build a federal case, which means you'll need to testify in multiple trials, potentially over the next year, and we'd like to propose something else. He glanced at Detective Martinez. We're developing a task force specifically to combat this type of fraud targeting older adults. We need someone with your experience and analytical skills to help identify other operations and train agents to recognize the warning signs. You want me to become a consultant? We want you to help us stop other women from going through what you experienced and what Margaret Patterson experienced. I thought about Margaret's frightened voice on the phone, about the 15 women currently being manipulated by criminals who'd studied their vulnerabilities. What would that involve? Training sessions with agents and potential victims, reviewing case files to identify patterns, occasionally serving as an advisor when we encounter sophisticated operations. Emily was shaking her head. Mom, this sounds dangerous. More dangerous than pretending these networks don't exist? I looked at her. Emily, Grant fooled you completely. He fooled Margaret Patterson and at least 8 other women. But he didn't fool me because I'd learned to trust my own judgment over other people's charm. I turned back to Agent Foster. What kind of support would be provided? Full coordination with local law enforcement, legal protection, and compensation for your time. I spent the rest of the afternoon thinking about the proposal. That evening, I called Margaret Patterson. Mrs. Patterson, it's Catherine Morrison. I wanted to ask you something. If you'd had someone to warn you about Grant's methods before he destroyed your security, would that have made a difference? Absolutely. If I'd known what to look for, I never would have trusted him. Even if that someone had to put themselves at risk to reach you. She was quiet for a moment. Are you thinking about working with the authorities? I'm thinking about making sure Grant's network doesn't destroy any more lives. Then I think you should do it. And Mrs. Morrison, thank you for being the one who finally stopped him. 6 months later, I was sitting in a small cafe 3 hours from home, watching a woman named Linda Chen have coffee with a man who'd been courting her for 2 months. According to the task force, he was using the same playbook Grant had used on Emily. The same network, the same methods. Linda was a recent widow who owned a successful small business. She had no idea she was being targeted. Mrs. Morrison, can you see them clearly? Detective Martinez's voice came through my earpiece. I can see both of them. He's showing her some kind of financial documents. That's the property management proposal. We need you to make contact now. I closed my book and walked to their table. Excuse me, aren't you Linda Chen? I think we met at the Business Owners Association meeting. Linda looked up, confused. I'm sorry, I don't think we've met. Oh, my mistake. You just look so much like a friend of mine who went through something similar. I glanced at the man who was watching me with interest. A charming man convinced her to let him manage her business assets after her husband died. It turned out he was stealing everything. Ma'am, the man said smoothly, we're having a private conversation. Of course, of course. I started to turn away, then stopped. Linda, just be careful about anyone who approaches you with investment advice too soon after a loss. These predators specifically target widows who own valuable property. That's enough, the man said, his voice taking on an edge. Oh, you're probably right. I smiled at him. I'm sure you're nothing like Grant Holloway. He went completely still. Who? Grant Holloway. He used the same approach, charming, helpful, very concerned about proper asset management. Of course, he's in federal prison now for elder fraud. He was part of some criminal network that targeted women with valuable property. Linda was looking back and forth between us. Sir, do you know this man she's talking about? I've never heard that name before, he said, but his eyes never left my face. Actually, I said, sitting down in the empty chair, I think Linda should hear about the investigation before she signs anything. Detective Martinez appeared behind him, her badge visible. State Police Financial Crimes Task Force. The arrest went smoothly after that. The documents in his briefcase provided evidence linking him to at least 4 other ongoing cases. Linda, I said as they led him away, you should know you were never in any real danger. We've been watching this operation for weeks. You're with the police? I'm a consultant, someone who survived the same type of attack you were about to experience. That evening, I called Emily from my hotel room. How did it go, Mom? We prevented another victim and arrested a major player in Grant's network. I'd call that a successful day. How many does that make now? 12 prevented thefts, 5 major arrests, and about 1.5 million in recovered assets returned to victims. Emily was quiet for a moment. Mom, do you ever regret getting involved in all this? I thought about Linda Chen, who would go home tonight to her business instead of signing documents that would have eventually destroyed her. I thought about Margaret Patterson, whose house had been saved from foreclosure with recovered assets. I thought about the 23 women who were currently living peacefully because someone had warned them before it was too late. Emily, do you remember when Grant first suggested I needed help managing my life? Unfortunately, yes. I realized something that day. The world is full of people who assume that women like me are helpless, confused, and grateful for male guidance. Grant was just the criminal version of an attitude that's everywhere. And now I spend my time proving that we're not helpless, we're not confused, and we definitely don't need guidance from men who see our independence as a problem to be solved. 2 days later, I was back home on my porch, watching the waves and reading case files for the next operation. Emily was driving down to spend the weekend, and Detective Martinez was briefing me tomorrow on a new network operating in another state. My phone buzzed with a text from Emily. Mom just passed your exit. Can't wait to hear about the case. Also, Agent Foster called. They want us both for the next operation. Are you up for another adventure? I typed back, always. As I sat there in the gathering twilight, I thought about the path that had brought me here. A year ago, I'd been a woman enjoying quiet retirement in her cottage. Now, I was a federal consultant who spent her time protecting other women from sophisticated criminals. Grant had been right about one thing. His arrest hadn't been the end of anything. It had been the beginning. The beginning of a task force that had become a model for other states. The beginning of partnerships with victim advocacy groups and elder protection agencies. The beginning of legislative changes to strengthen prosecution of financial predators. But most importantly, it had been the beginning of something Grant could never have anticipated, a network of women who refused to be victims. Tomorrow, Emily and I would start planning how to dismantle another criminal network. Next week, I'd testify at a hearing about romance fraud. Next month, I'd train a new group of law enforcement officers to recognize the manipulation tactics used by relationship predators. Grant had tried to steal my home. Instead, he'd given me a purpose that was bigger than any house, more valuable than any bank account, and more satisfying than any quiet retirement could have been. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. Sometimes it's becoming exactly what your enemies never expected you to become. And what Grant had never expected was that this supposedly helpless middle-aged woman would become the kind of person who made sure that criminals like him never succeeded again. I'd learned to trust my judgment over others' charm, and that made all the difference. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to EchoLens Stories, and tell me where you're listening from. Your voice matters, and your story could be next.